Dr. O'Connor, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation and learn a little bit about your experience and what you've been able to help people with. But before we jump into it, I'd like to give the guest an opportunity to share a little bit about themselves and what's brought them here today.
Sure. So, Dr. Eddie O'Connor, I'm a clinical sport performance psychologist. I really love to work in that space in between for high performers. I address a lot with performance anxiety, perfectionism, stress, type A personalities, inability to tolerate mistakes, because as high achievers, we care so much about what it is that we want to get done. And what I like to do is help the listeners and anybody else who might find themselves in this position to
Hmm.
really understand that you should be anxious, that
Yeah.
positive thinking doesn't work. And probably more topics that we'll just really get into. But I love this space of really helping high achievers overcome their obstacles to excellence.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And there's so much overlap between our day-to-day lives and from that perspective, and then even on the athletic side, right? And people tend to struggle, and there's that overlap, as I mentioned. So how does that tie in, right? So if you're working with athletes, a lot of the times what I've come to understand is a lot of it is personal, right? And there's a lot of shifts that need to occur from a mindset perspective. What's going on for people in that space that you're able to help them with?
Sure. First, let me qualify because this isn't limited to athletes. So I
Hmm.
help, again, high achievers. And by high achiever, I mean somebody who really wants something. So I've got professional musicians, performing artists, actors, actresses, businessmen and women. But I've also worked in health populations, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, people who want to lose weight. And I consider them high achievers as well, too, because they have a goal that they want to get after. And
Hmm.
so your context might be different. Don't turn this off if you're like, well, I'm not an elite athlete. This doesn't apply to me. If you want to get somewhere in life, if you have a goal, this applies to you.
Hmm.
And that's what I love about it, about combining the clinical psychology and like what human beings do with then the sport psychology, which is, again, the mental toughness.
Okay.
So the biggest thing that you said is like what gets in the way is for me to really, again, justify that we have a survival instinct called the negativity bias.
Hmm.
And we can't get rid of that. We so often, we might learn about it and we forget about it. But what that basically means is that you have a brain that is designed to protect you by looking out into the environment and everything that could go wrong. For example, I hope, what's the first thing you do before you cross the street? What's the first thing you think of?
Looking both ways.
Right. Now, nobody would consider that anxiety, right? It's like a smart thing to do. But you notice that whether it's the alarm clock goes off in the morning, the first thing I think of is, what's my first appointment? Am I going to be late? What am I going to
Hmm.
do later on? Are my kids okay? Where am I going to have for dinner? It's a lot of problem solving that our head is always doing because we want to be sure that we get our basic needs met. And we're just like getting into this right away. But yeah, I bet if I could ask anybody listening, what are the three things that you care the most about? That's also going to be your top list of what are the three things that you worry the most about.
Hmm.
Be it your fitness, your family, and your job. And you invest so much time and energy into that.
Hmm.
If you don't do well in the areas that you care the most about, you're going to be hurt. So the first thing to do as you kind of start to look at our anxieties is to say, maybe I should be anxious about this. Maybe my anxiety isn't a problem or pathological. Maybe
Hmm.
it's just tuning me in and saying, I'm working in an important space here. If I'm nervous about a game and it's, oh my gosh, but I prepared, I tell my athletes all the time, you should be nervous. And they're like, why? And I'm like, well, because you could lose. Somebody's going to lose. You could strike out. You could embarrass your team. You could make a mistake. Am I supposed to tell you that none of this stuff's going to happen?
Hmm.
That's why positive thinking doesn't work. Because if you're ignoring the threat in front of you, it increases your anxiety.
Right.
Again, I don't mean to dismiss panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorders, or the extremes in this case. There's things that we need to do to address those. But on the continuum, much of the anxiety that performers have, much of the day-to-day stress that we have is not a problem because it's there. It's how we respond to it. I'll take a
Hmm.
pause here because otherwise I could just lecture for 45 minutes. But that's the
Yeah.
thing, that the first thing that I want to get people to do is to get off the idea that there's something wrong with them and they're broken. If you're in a place that you care about, you need to be anxious because there are a threat.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's three major themes that are at least coming up for me in terms of what you're sharing here. One is this, I think because we've started to label anxiety, there's so much stigma around it. Experiencing anxiety can be perceived as something negative. And what I'm hearing from you is that's perfectly normal because you are going to worry about a future outcome, but it's how you channel that anxiety. So we can probably expand on that. But the other two themes I'm hearing also is this aspect of perfectionism. So, irrespective of how you're performing, you're going to worry about, okay, it has to be a certain way. And then you get stuck in that. And I think that's where you see a lot of people, they're so focused on that future outcome that it could almost, they're so stuck that they can't even perform in the present moment. Right? And then the third thing I would want to also explore is how are some people then able to get in that zone and focus versus some others? Like, what are they doing differently? And I know we've talked about athletes, but any high performer, how are they able to channel that anxiety and get in the zone? And you see that with athletes, right? Some are just so dialed in, whereas others could potentially struggle and they're so worried about making that mistake. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you here, but maybe
Yeah.
let's talk about the whole anxiety piece and how society is, as much as we have agency now that we can label it and understand it better, there is a downside to it, right? Because now we become so focused on that piece.
Yes. So I'm writing it down. So if I get you
Yeah,
questions, like one is let's talk more about what anxiety is and isn't in
yeah,
pathology. Then there's perfectionism, and then there's how do we get into the zone. Those are three
yeah,
questions.
yeah.
Okay.
For now, yeah,
For now. All right.
yeah.
So number one about the anxiety, you're exactly right. We have four basic human emotions. Play along
Hmm.
with me. And those listening, take a guess here. What do you, of all the complicated emotions that we have, and we used to think back in the day that we had six or seven, but they did this brilliant study a number of years ago, facial recognition studies across all cultures to look at the biological expression of emotion. And they boiled it down to just four. So what do you think those four basic human emotions are?
I would, based on some of the stuff I've come across, I would guess there's pain, there's fear, I would say there's shame, and I don't know, maybe the fourth would be anger.
That's a colorful list, and I'd say you
Yeah,
hit two out of the four: the
yeah,
fear and the anger.
yeah,
Shame is something we'll talk about how we want to be able to get
yeah.
you out of that because that's not one that we want to have. It's a real emotion, but maybe not one of the four basic.
Right.
Pain is a biopsychosocial experience, so there certainly is an emotional component to it, but
Hmm.
it's more complicated. But if we get to
Hmm.
really simple, happy, which unfortunately you skipped,
Yeah.
sad, the other side of
Hmm.
it,
Right.
mad and scared. So happy, sad, mad, and scared. How many of those are positive or pleasurable?
I
God,
would, yeah, just the one, right?
one.
Hmm.
So let's pause here. If we're able to have four categories of emotions and 75% of what we can feel as human beings sucks if we
Hmm.
don't like it, or
Right.
even worse, if we feel it, we pathologize it, like you said. And because I don't know about you, but anytime I'm mad, people tell me to calm down. When I'm scared, they tell me I'm going to be okay. When I'm sad, they try to cheer me up. There's a very low tolerance for 75% of the normal human emotions. Yeah, I was at
Hmm.
a funeral a while ago too, and people hug me and be like, "Oh, don't cry," like they're in a better place. As if,
Yeah.
why wouldn't I not cry? Like I know they're in a better place based on my spiritual beliefs, but I'm crying for me. I'm going to miss them. Why do we have such a low tolerance for this? And then for athletes or high performers, the average human being, are you really supposed to go through your life and not be sad about things? Like if you lose a game, if you make a mistake, or you're not supposed to be sad about it, or you're not supposed to be scared about your future when you're entrepreneur and you don't know how the business is going to go in 3 to 6 months. Maybe you should be anxious about it. Or I don't know if I'm going to pass that test. That anxiety can be very positive because when you start to relate to it in that way, it's warning me. I don't mean to beat up on my son about this, but he'd be like, "Oh, I'm nervous for this performance." He's a musician, or I'm nervous about this test. I learned early on that my question was, "Have you studied?"
Yeah.
And the answer is often no. I'm
Hmm.
not going to treat your anxiety. You have a preparation problem. You
Yeah,
have every right to
absolutely.
be anxious. And what's driven me nuts in the field is how much we push. You got to be confident. You got to believe. And I'm not saying that doesn't work. When you can, you do have more powerful and easier results. But there are plenty of things that go on in our lives where being sad, being mad, being anxious is a completely appropriate response. And we have to stop telling people that because they feel these normal human emotions, that there's something wrong with them, and teach them the skills about how to perform with these appropriate emotions. That's where
Right.
we're lacking. How do I go
Hmm.
into the batter's box with anxiety and hit the ball? How do I, you know, embrace my sadness, but still engage with other people and not isolate and do things that make my depression worse? There's a way of interacting with these normal feelings, and we are not going to feel good all the time. Can we
Hmm.
accept that and stop telling people that they have a right to be happy all the time? You do
Right.
not. Apparently, you have a right to be happy 25% of the time.
Yeah. When I think that's where your point around forcing that positive outlook can be, it can have a lot of downside, right? And I think that's where people have called it toxic positivity. But what I've come to understand is you can have a positive mindset, but you should still be able to have acceptance for whatever you're experiencing, good or bad, right?
Yes.
And when we
And you
tend to label things, that's when it becomes debilitating.
perfect. And you know what? The other idea is let's define what we mean by positive,
Hmm.
because positive doesn't always mean happy, optimistic, and feeling good. Positive, I've learned, can actually mean moving me in the direction that I want to go. So you can have, for example, like in sports, we talk about positive versus negative thinking, and negative is what I don't want, but positive is what I do want. And then taking
Hmm.
action, positive thinking is telling me what to do in this situation. That's positive because it moves me forward. I may still not like it. I may not like the workout or how many miles I have to run, but the idea of knowing that's what I'm going to do as opposed to staying stuck in my head, that's positive because it
Hmm.
moves me in the direction that I want to go. And we know that actions, particularly in sports, but in life as well, are much more important than what I'm thinking or feeling. I'll
Yeah.
say that again. I've never seen anybody win a baseball game because they felt good. It might be related and it might help, but the team that scores the most runs always wins. Can I learn to play the game? Can I learn to engage these things according to what I like to really talk about, like values and character? Let's take just even the idea of being in a marriage and like generalizing this outside of sport. We know that our spouses can be quite complicated and that we have different agendas and things happen. But
For
if I
sure.
can stay focused on the type of husband that I want to be, or the type of person that I want to be and how I interact with other people, then it becomes no matter what I feel, I can still be honest or caring. And that's the standard that I can hold myself up for because that's the person that I want to be. And then that creates so much more freedom. And I may not like doing it, I may not feel like it, but by knowing who it is that I want to be and what's important to me and the character that I want to have, that's the motivation, independent
Hmm.
of what somebody else might be doing, or again, or the score or the situation. So you had hinted at that earlier in the podcast,
Yeah.
but you really absolutely as a part of performance, we really need to have that target of what am I really striving for in that value aspect? What has meaning? Is this a personal choice that I can use as my center to help me get through this adversity? You need to have, and if you want to write this one down, people, you need to have purpose in your pain.
Mm. Yes.
And by pain, physical pain, exhaustion, but I also mean the anger,
Hmm.
the anxiety, and the
Hmm.
sadness. Can I experience these things all in service of that goal or valued characteristic that I want to
Right.
display?
Yeah, and do you feel that you can even extend that pain to some of the emotional pain or mental pain you may experience from defeat? And the reason, and I think this is probably a good segue into the perfectionism aspect, and we touched on shame earlier, and the two are often tied together. But I was reading recently Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset, and we live in a society or a world often that we become fall into that fixed mindset where any form of failure we tend to internalize it. So there's something to be said about embracing those failures and looking at them as opportunities.
What I like to talk about in perfectionism is that it is actually a great thing to have. I am a big fan of all my perfectionists because the research has found that, in fact, if you are more perfectionistic, you tend to get better grades and better outcomes and things of that nature. The difference, just like you had suggested, was what happens when mistakes show up, because they do. Now, here's some advice for the perfectionists out there or the people who love these perfectionists. Don't tell them that mistakes are okay, because they're not. Don't tell them that, oh, don't worry about it. Nobody's perfect. You need to just accept it. Perfectionists find that insulting because it's reflecting that you don't understand how important it is for me to get this outcome. And you're not appreciating how much the mistakes that I'm making are actually hurting. So the problem is that when we have an unhealthy perfectionism, two things. One is that it becomes not that I did something wrong, it's that I am wrong. And that's where shame comes in. But we have to keep it more on behaviors. But the bigger idea is, what do mistakes really mean? So I encourage you to continue to not have your, not to say the mistakes are okay and not to be okay with them. Like, you can continue to hate them. And at the very same time, appreciate that they're necessary for learning. Now, this is cliche. So often we are saying, yeah, I got to learn from my mistakes. And then we say, but, which cancels out what we had just said, but I hate them and I can't make them anymore. And I demand more of myself, which is really this existential hell that we put ourselves in, because if the only thing that's acceptable is perfection and it's really impossible for us to achieve it, we're always going to be dissatisfied. And then that leads to burnout. So while you hold on to your dislike for mistakes, please understand that you have to make them in service of growing. If you want to approach perfection, you have to see the mistake that lets you know what you did wrong so that you don't do it again. And in that way, mistakes are helpful if you understand that they're a part of the learning process. And we do that early on. Again, let me ask you out there, how do we ultimately turn this perfectionism into something that's actually healthy and can actually help us improve? It comes down to the relationship that you have with the mistakes. Now, again, this is not something that I expect you to ever like, and I don't even encourage it. It's not necessary. But something to respect. But again, let me ask you, did you learn how to walk by watching your parents for 2 years and all of a sudden jump up and walk perfectly?
No.
No, of course. You probably stumbled and fell hundreds of times. Did you check out a video to learn how to swim? Watch it, really study it? No, you probably were in the water, swallowed a little bit as you
Mhm.
made mistakes and learned how to do it. How about riding a bike? Did you just read a really good bike riding book? Study it? No, I see
Yeah.
you laughing. No, I fell down and scuffed my knees. And we understood all of that when we were growing up, that we had to actually do these things. But somewhere around kindergarten, start getting corrections on our penmanship and we start getting red marks on our paper. And all of a sudden, all the feedback that we get in first grade, second grade, third grade, all going all the way up, and the coaches that start to come into our lives, and all of that as we're learning how to grow, the parental influences, and they're all necessary for coaching, because a 5-year-old doesn't know what to do, a 10-year-old doesn't know what to do, a 26-year-old doesn't know what to do. We all continue to need coaching. But during this young period, we're getting so much feedback about where we need to be better, and we're getting grades on how well we're doing. And we've underemphasized the value of mistakes. Mistakes still hurt. They still cost us.
Mhm.
But please understand that if that's how you learn how to walk and swim and read, that's going to be how you're going to learn how to ride your bike or hit a baseball, run track, be in a relationship. The way that you relate to the mistakes. And if you actually take the intention to learn from them, like literally after I make a mistake, what went wrong here? What do I need to do differently the next time? Then you've got an inch of growth.
Mhm.
Now you're approaching that perfection that you're going after. And if you keep making the same mistake over and over again, which we've done and which I've done in my life for sometimes 2 decades, like it takes a while to learn these things. And it's because we're lacking that idea. We take the failure, we blame somebody else. We say, oh, I just didn't try hard enough. I'll just do better next time. And it
Mhm.
protects our ego. That's why we skip over it. So if you really want to be mentally tough and you want to be the best perfectionist, if you want to be the perfect perfectionist, as I call it, then you have a relationship with your mistakes that every time you make one, you say, what did this teach me? I'm not going to do this again. I fix it. And then you make a different mistake next time.
Mhm.
And if you follow that process, I promise you, my friends, your rate of growth is going to be exponential. And you're still not going to like the mistakes. You're still going to have frustration. And that's fine. You should, because you didn't hit the things that you wanted to do. But you'll be better the next day
Yeah.
because And you'll start to feel better when you find that you're growing every day as a result of this. Again, you'll never love the mistakes, but they're going to stop holding you back.
Hmm.
And they're no longer going to be a problem. That's all I'm thinking about and replaying it in my head. If it's replaying it in your head, it's to identify what could I do differently and then learn. And then you can let it go, because here's the other magic question I want you to write down. Is this going to offer me anything else? And if it isn't, the practical question of, then why do I hold on to it?
Right.
Usually we'll justify because I'm so upset about it. Is that a good reason to hold on to it? Or again, can we start to have more choice in saying, I'm going to choose to ruminate, or I'm going to choose to bring it over, learn what I can. And then here's my most favorite focus strategy. Focus on the win,
Mm.
WIN, what's important now. Learn from the mistake, fix it. Does it offer me anything else? No. So what's important now? The next play, the person in front of me, preparation. You can do this in every aspect of your life. And if you keep that mantra, again, you'll find yourself to be much more intentional and purposeful as you go about, and your growth will be exponential.
No, and I appreciate that. And I think even within that, you're going to make mistakes and stumble through that mindset, right? Because you're going to have days where you're hard on yourself and perhaps you're blaming external circumstances, but you need to catch yourself and recognize that I'm here for the process rather than the outcome. And we often have to navigate back and forth, and it's a bit of a dance, right? And I think for me personally, I'm not a professional athlete, but in general in life, there's things that I'm striving for, and it's not always the outcome I sought. And sometimes it's tough being in those moments of failure, but then it's what kind of narrative you have with yourself and what's the internal dialogue there.
Yeah, again, you dropped a couple of big nuggets there that I don't think you realize. One is like sports psychology 101, process over outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is stuff that we know, but let me go back to that primitive brain that we all have, how it's designed to worry about the future, designed to warn us of danger. And part of that distraction that we have, which is healthy and normal, no matter how severe you have it, this is a healthy brain that's going to look at the outcome of what I want, the end of the score, the end of the relationship, the business success, the health of whatever. There are these outcomes. And of course, that's why we play the games and why we do these
Mm-hmm.
things. It's for the outcomes. And if we're focusing on the future outcome, we're not paying attention to the details of today in the here and now that requires our attention to do the best of our ability to ensure the outcome that we want. And this is why I have a job, right? Because we have to train this. If everybody could do this, I wouldn't have a job. There wouldn't be no need for me. The idea here, though, just like you said beautifully, is, hey, every time I'm worried about the outcome, I got to bring my attention on purpose back to the present moment and say, what's important now? And what's that action step? That's the positive thinking.
Mm-hmm.
What's the action step that I can take that's going to prepare me or move me closer towards that, and do that?
Right.
And you also said, but that's hard. Like, we need to accept the difficulty in it. And if hard is going to be the reason that we don't do stuff, and notice we'll say that all the time, oh, but that's hard. Oh, but I don't feel like it. Then we're prioritizing our emotions over our goals. And we're not willing to feel those emotions in service of it. Remember I said earlier, purpose in your pain?
Mm-hmm.
That's the other biggest obstacle that my clients have, is that it's almost like, how do I get more motivated? I hate that question. I mean, if we can, let's do it. But we need commitment, not motivation, because you're not always going to be motivated to get up at 5 a.m. or to go through that last set when you're in physical pain, or to take that financial risk, or to treat that person well when you're really ticked off at them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not going to have motivations for those things. Your purpose can lead you towards it. But if you're going to be interacting and letting your emotions dictate the way that you live and the way that you eat and the way that you exercise, the way you treat people, you're screwed.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move away from that and start to say, again, our actions, they're independent than what we think and feel.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question, and I'll summarize it with this. If you actually did everything that ever crossed your mind and you acted on every urge you ever had, where would you be right now?
I probably wouldn't be further ahead. I'll tell you that.
That's at a minimum.
Yeah.
But be honest. You don't have to tell me what you're thinking and feeling,
Yeah.
but where would you be? I usually get only 2 answers.
It depends on the urge, right? So
Well, you're avoiding the question, my friend. I said, if you do everything that's ever crossed your mind, if you actually acted on everything that ever crossed your mind and you acted on every urge that you ever had, I get that people would be dead or in jail. Because I'm saying everything. And my
Yeah.
point was to just really look at it and realize that you've had urges to punch somebody when you were angry, but you didn't.
Hmm.
That you saw something laying out and you could steal it and you're like, oh, but that's unethical and you didn't do it. That, you could cheat. You've gone to work when you didn't feel like it. You've competed when you didn't want to. You were nice to people who were mean to you. All day, every day, we're doing things that we don't feel like doing because we don't want to get arrested or we've got a moral code.
Hmm.
But the idea is recognize that you're already good at this, my friends. You
Hmm.
are already like, I don't know about you, but I never want to get out of bed in the morning. And I always do because I've got a job to go to or someplace to go. I would rather sleep. I'd rather eat chocolate chip cookies all day, every day.
Hmm.
But I don't because I have also fitness and health goals. Now, sometimes I still do. So sometimes I do let my emotions lead. But a lot of the times when I let that happen, it doesn't work. So when people say, but that's hard and I can't do it because I had this feeling, like, we're not kids anymore. I remember my kids, I'd be like, why'd you hit your brother? He made me mad.
Hmm.
As if that was a justifiable reason to punch people. Maybe it is when you're 3, but by the time you're in elementary school, you can't do that anymore. And if you do that as an adult, you're going to jail. Already good, my friends, at doing things independent of what you think and feel. So in the places that it's really hard, please remember that you can make the choice and not act on that thought and feeling. And it's hard, but it is a skill that you can develop. Please take the time to practice it and develop it and give yourself some grace.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. In your example too, I wonder, because there are times I agree with you. It's hard to get out of bed and go to the gym and force yourself. But after going through that, I'm so much more grateful for pushing myself through it. So how does that factor in to all of this then?
Oh
When
yeah, there was a great research study done a long time ago, and they empirically looked at this. And again, knowing that the negativity bias, I like how we're being repetitive here because it drills it in. Knowing that I'm always going to focus on threats, if I'm going to go exercise, I'm going to hurt. Like, I'm actually thinking about it later today. I've got a workout in my CrossFit gym. It's called Stages of Grief. It's a 40-minute ridiculous workout that nobody finishes. And the whole time I'm thinking about it, like, it's one of the most painful workouts all year. And just to your point, the idea is if you focus on the pain and how much it's going to suck, you're not going to do it.
hmm
Because why would you?
right.
But the idea is I'm like, this isn't my opportunity to put myself through this and get better than I did last year. Or, wow, this is going to be a great workout to move me towards my fitness goals. This is going to be a real push. Or when I'm done with this, I'm going to feel really good about myself because I
Yeah,
just did something hard.
exactly.
And this isn't to discount the pain, but the focus is on pain with a purpose.
Yeah.
And the research has found that nobody who's ever really gone to the gym, and I say that nobody, but I'll say like 99%, has ever regretted the workout. Unless you do something stupid and push yourself way too hard and hurt yourself. But most of the time, it's if you just remember that every time I go to the gym, I feel better afterwards, and you hold on to that as your experiential truth, then you can recognize that the negativity bias and focusing on the pain I'm going to put myself in is just a human instinct.
Hmm.
But I can't let it lead. I have to make a choice.
Hmm.
I can either believe my basic instincts or I can take action and become the person I want to be and bring that unpleasantness along with me. My friends, you have a choice to make.
Hmm.
It's up to you.
Yeah, yeah, and I really like what you've mentioned a few times, that purpose in the pain, and that's a philosophical idea too, right? Finding meaning in your experiences, especially the tough ones where you're overcoming adversity. You can find that meaning in terms of how you were able to navigate through it. And I often refer to Viktor Frankl's book Man's Search for
Yeah.
Meaning, and that's the idea there. But what if you're, so I know you gave the example of, okay, you've had experience, you've gone for a workout, it feels great. So you're able to use that as something to motivate yourself. But what if you don't have that experience from the past? What if you're doing something new and it's really difficult and challenging and right in front of you? How do you then navigate that? And how is it any different? Yeah.
It's not very different. It's just an elaboration or a different twist.
Hmm.
Because again, what I hear in your question is, how do I make it easier on myself is what you're asking.
Hmm.
And I'm saying you may not. It's directly, is it worth it?
Hmm.
That's the bigger question.
Right.
So many people like drop out of sports or these big challenges because it's not worth the work.
Hmm.
And that's fine. Not everybody can be a champion. Like true excellence, let me go back up a minute. True excellence, we've lost respect for it. Every time, with all the participatory medals and everybody's great and look, if everybody's great, then we no longer have excellence because now great is the new normal. And we're just raising the threshold.
Hmm.
But the reality is that you have people who are outliers. Champions are not normal. Success is not normal. It's on the higher end of the spectrum. And if you want to be in the top 5%, that means you have to do what 95% of the other people either can't or won't.
Hmm.
And we have to respect that. Please, we have to respect excellence and the fact that it costs something.
Hmm.
It costs time, it costs money, it costs an investment, it costs physical and emotional pain and sacrifices. And if you're not willing to do that and you want to be average, there's nothing wrong with average.
Right.
Average could be a nice, wonderfully harmonious life where you're pretty good in everything, not great in anything, but you got good decent amount of money, you got a decent family, you got a decent job. There's nothing wrong with that. There's some nice balance. I'll tell you, with the elite athletes that I work with, they're elite there, but maybe they're a bit lonely. Maybe they don't. I remember talking to an Olympian just last year who's talking about now, as her career was over, she got a house and she got a dog and she's checking out coffee shops, like stuff that you and I do all the time.
Right.
But she was so dedicated to the sport, she couldn't do those things. She was excited to spend time with her husband, which apparently she wasn't doing much of either.
Right.
There's real sacrifices that go in. So if you're saying that you're going to do something that's going to be really hard, you better have a really good reason to do it. How much do you want that gold medal, that championship, that sense of accomplishment? Like, what does it do for you? You
Hmm.
have to make it personal.
Right.
It's not you don't have to do it.
Hmm.
And you're going to have to do things that you're not motivated to do, but commitment.
Yeah.
I value commitment so much more than motivation. And it's intimately tied into what does it mean to you? It cannot be defined.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, just tying it to more ideas that are out there, but what I'm hearing from you is it's beyond the commitment. There's a sense of mastery that you need to adopt, and that Malcolm Gladwell has talked about it in Outliers. As you mentioned, there are these outliers who the rule is 10,000 hours to really master something, give or take. But
Nope, they blew that up. That
yeah,
was actually misquoted of the research.
yeah,
I have to go on this tangent. I'm sorry
sure.
to interrupt it,
No,
but
absolutely.
it was, that was briefly, if I remember correctly, that was briefly taken and summarized for
Yeah.
this particular subset. But the idea is that depending on the area that you're looking at, it could be less, or for
Hmm.
many cases, much, much more.
Hmm.
Take an example of marathon runners now. What used to win the marathon like decades ago now won't even qualify you for Boston. As we get further along, excellence and mastery and it's just getting further, requiring more and more. So for many things, it might take 10,000 hours. And then some people have done 10,000 hours, but depending on the quality of those hours, it matters.
Right.
There's this thing called deliberate practice, which is incredibly important. And that improves the quality of your practicing. So I do this a lot with my athletes too. You're just showing up and going through the motions. You could do that for 10,000 hours and only be a little bit better.
Right.
So 10,000 hours is an oversimplification.
Hmm.
Just wanted to clarify that. But if you're talking about it's a big investment, then yes.
Yes. Yeah. That was the idea, but I do appreciate you talking through that, because that does misrepresent the whole idea of it, right? Because what you're saying here is it's not that quantity of 10,000 hours and all of a sudden you should expect yourself to be mastering something. It's the quality of your dedication to the work as well that factors it in, and that could vary too. So I do appreciate that, and thank you for correcting that notion around the 10,000 hour rule. Now, I do want to come back to the last question I did have for you around that focus piece, right? How are some people able to get into the zone where others can't? And I know there's an aspect of performance anxiety that comes into play as well, but what differentiates people from getting in there and doing it in the moment versus getting distracted or discouraged or hopeless, all of those things that do come up?
Yeah. So there's 10 or so qualities of being in the zone. And so we won't go through all of them now, but there's a whole research about that, staying in line with what we've talked about and what keeps people out of that zone. One, from my perspective and the athletes that I work with, again, if we're going to highlight perfectionism and anxiety, is that the anxiety is still perceived as a threat. And until you can become comfortable, no, I don't like that word either. Until you can actually respect
Mm-hmm.
that the discomfort and it's going to stay uncomfortable and you become willing to feel it. But the idea is that you also have to know that it's safe, because when we feel anxiety, we're remembering that it's saying that there's a threat,
Mm-hmm.
and just being okay with okay, there's a bear in front of me and I'm going to be really anxious. And me accepting that anxiety is not going to make me feel better. It's not going to help me perform better. It's not going to get me to focus on what else I need to do. I need to know that I can be anxious in front of this bear, but you better tell me that it's a circus bear, or that you've got a gun on it, or that I'm like strong enough to wrestle it to the ground and beat it. I need to know, can I handle this adversity? I'm afraid here, but do I have the skills to be safe?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the first step, because you can't get into the zone as long as there's a threat. So going back to the ideas that we talked about, preparation, am I prepared? If the worst thing happens, will I be okay? I'm talking to a friend of mine in the gym, and she's going to be doing a 50-mile ultra. And she was talking about her anxiety and nervousness about it. And we just said, I was like, well, you should be nervous. And she's like, no, I shouldn't. This is bothersome. And I'm like, well, did you train? Yes. Are you ready? Yes. If this bad thing happened, what would you do? And she had a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, so this is your mind telling you that all these threats are real. She's like, I'm just being irrational. I'm like, no, you're not. It's a 50-mile race and you're going to be out by yourself in the heat.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't you be nervous about this? And she's like, yeah, I guess that does make sense. We created safety around it, but also then addressed the anxiety and said, what would you do if the worst thing went wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And then once you can have that safety in the anxiety, you can still then let the anxiety be there, because now you've taken care of it and you've listened.
Mm-hmm.
You're not just saying, oh, just ignore the bear, you'll be fine.
Right.
That makes me more nervous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, you're not acknowledging the threats.
Right. And there's
The
a,
other
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and then what that enables you to do is get out of the future. And the biggest quality of being into the zone is being in that present moment, like we discussed earlier. So whether you're reviewing mistakes in the past, that's the past. You need to have learned from it, but then bring yourself to the now, what's important now. And then your mind's going to go to the future as well and say, this could go wrong and that could go wrong. And it's never going to stop. If you want to practice something, a mindfulness training can be excellent to bring your mind to practice unhooking from the thoughts and feelings that are distractions that will go on for the rest of your life. Please accept that.
Yeah.
But you can develop the skill of noticing when you're away from the present moment, unhooking from the past or future, or the evaluations that our head tends to speak in, and come back into the moment and say, what do I need to do right now in a behavioral way?
Mm-hmm.
And any performance, you'll have to do that over and over again.
Yeah.
And I would say that's the number one way to train yourself to get into the zone.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you about, because there's this aspect of when you say present moment, some people call it flow state, and I've been able to get into those zones where I'm just so dialed in, but it's very hard to get there because there's so many other distractions that often come up, and you get caught up in, okay, how's the future going to play out here, especially even if you're playing sports. But it takes a lot of practice to get to that state. And once you achieve it, like I know when I look back, I'm like, wow, that was like something very special. And you almost want to keep experiencing that feeling, but it takes a lot of discipline and focus. And I don't know how you explain that, but it's hard to explain, to be honest.
So no, you're explaining it perfectly, but I've been laughing.
Yeah.
So if I was going to pick on you, what did you just say that I'm like, as a sports psychologist, I'm going to pick on you for? You said it about 20 seconds ago.
Said like this, the state that I was
No,
able to access.
yeah, no, I'm sure you did. You missed it. You were like, but it's hard.
Yes. Yeah, it's hard.
I'm going to pick on you for that.
Yeah.
Because that's what I'm hearing is the question underneath the question is like, oh, but this is difficult. What can the sports psychologist say? Should I make this easier? That's a problem. I notice this in my life all the time. It's a human thing. But you're probably, if in any area that you're failing, I'm convinced that there's going to be some element of it, but it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And when we say, but it's hard, but it's difficult, we're unconsciously looking for an easier way.
Mm-hmm.
And of course we are. You're not broken. That's the way it is.
Right.
But it's not the way excellence is done. So if you're going to be sensitive to anything that you're saying in your own head, my friends, find out when you're saying, but it's hard, but I don't like it. Because then it's giving you an excuse to not do it. It's a reason to not study, to not work hard, to not apply yourself, to like, Yes, refocusing is incredibly difficult. Under pressure, it's even harder.
Hmm.
And if you want to be a winner, if you want to succeed, you have to do and overcome and invite that hard stuff into your life and practice it, accepting that it's hard because that's what's going to put you ahead of everybody else. So it's not because it's hard. Start saying, and it's hard.
Mm.
Let there be room for the difficulty and the changes that you want to make. Respect that what you're trying to do and what you're failing at is difficult. And that extra energy that you'll have by dropping the struggle to make it easy, you can then put it into the actions to get where you want to go.
Yeah, that's wonderfully said. Thank you so much, Dr. O'Connor, for your time and sharing so much wisdom and challenging me. And it's given me a lot to think about and go back to the drawing board and work through some things. But anything else you would like to add that we didn't touch on and you think would be of value to the listeners, including myself?
Oh, my friend, there's a million more things. We could do this for hours. So let me cut to the chase and say, though, that I do have a free resource for people if I could let them know.
Hmm.
If you like what I've been talking about and how do I get out of my head and how do I accept all of these things, I have a free training for you on my website called What to Do When Positive Thinking Doesn't Work. It's a short 20-minute video, but it really trains you in a deeper dive into what we've spoken about so that you can kind of start to make some peace with what your head is saying and not be so impulsive as a result of it, but without having to fight it all the time and be positive. It's going to help you have that willingness that we started to talk about to let the anxiety be there and then be free to take action. So
Hmm.
it's free on my website at dreddieoconnor.com. It's called What to Do When Positive Thinking Doesn't Work. You just put in your email, you get instant access to the video right away. And then I also have links to my Success Stories membership. It's a community online where if you want to, again, overcome those obstacles, everything that I do with my athletes and clients one-on-one, I've got in a video format. And it's real easy access for you there too. A great place is another resource for you to be able to join and get the help that you need to accomplish your goals when it's really difficult and
Hmm.
overcome those obstacles that are keeping you back.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that resource. And if beyond that, if get listeners wanted to get a hold of you or find some of your work, what can they do to find you online?
Yeah, again, dreddieoconnor.com is the best place. If you go there, I've got a blog that has wonderful topics that you can read about. That's all free. It's got a link to my YouTube channel and Mental Toughness in 60 Seconds. So if you want quick advice, that's all free, in addition to the Success Stories community and that free training video. So dreddieoconnor.com is your one-stop shop for everything.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll share that in the show notes. And thank you
Thanks.
again for your time today. Much
Yeah,
appreciated.
my pleasure. Best wishes to everybody.